be a slave. They could be living up in Maine or in New York or Wisconsin. Remember we learned about Joshua Glover. When we learned Joshua Glover's story, that's what happened to him, right? He was living way up in Wisconsin, nowhere near slavery. And still they came up there and got him, and if it hadn't been for the people of Milwaukee breaking down the doors, setting him free with that church beam, you remember the story.
Yeah.
If it hadn't been for that, he would have had to go back to slavery. And that's because of the Fugitive Slave Act of 1850. So you can see how that would really petrify and scare all African American people, because anybody could be caught and dragged back, and also make people in the North really, really, really angry, because they have to be a part of something that they don't want anything to do with. Right? So that's Fugitive Slave Act of 1850. So far we've had the two events, right? 1820. 1820 is the Missouri Compromise, right? Then, in 1850, we have the Fugitive Slave Act. 1820. 1820. Missouri Compromise. And you got a little time. 1850 is the Fugitive Slave Act. And then as we keep going, there's going to be another event, but in 1861, the Civil War begins. Now, as we've learned, all this time, a lot of people, and a lot of really smart people, knew the Civil War was coming. There was no way around it. Thomas Jefferson said it. When they had the Missouri Compromise, he said, this might have put off problems for a while, but it's not a solution. This problem has not been solved. Frederick Douglass, in a famous speech that I will share with you at some point, talked about how there was no way that slavery would end without a war, without a battle, and without bloodshed. We'll get to that later. So, Fugitive Slave Act, 1850. Let's take a look at a little bit of a different way of understanding this. I'm going to have you read through this on your own first, but don't answer any of the questions. Then we'll read through it together and talk about the questions. Now, today in ELA, or in reading, I should say, I'm not calling it ELA anymore, in reading, you worked on notice and note, and you worked on numbers and statistics. Well, this right here is an example of why we learn about how to do nonfiction reading. This right here is a piece of nonfiction reading. And as you read through it, I bet you'll notice some of those things. Maybe contrasts and contradictions. Maybe you'll see some contrasts with what you believe, or what you believe was right. Maybe you'll see some extreme language. And perhaps you'll see, well, in fact, I know you'll see some numbers and statistics. So when you're reading through this, look for that. Because like I said, we don't only read in reading class, we read all the time. So those skills that we work on in reading class count no matter where we're at. Maggie, are you reading? It looks like you're coloring a pencil to me.
I'm halfway there. I'm halfway done. Yeah, the marker is very good. I do this almost every day. Do this pencil. If you sharpen it, I'll go. I do this every day.
All right, let's read it together now.
I'll do
And then
it
we'll
again.
talk about the questions and be able to answer the questions.
Okay. Good,
It
try
says-
this one.
Prior to 1860, the two great regions of the country, the North and the South, were finding it increasingly difficult to agree on several matters. One of the causes of constant trouble was the issue of slavery. In an effort to resolve some of the differences between the regions, the Compromise of 1850 was passed. As you may know, in the compromise, each side gives in a little in order to solve a problem. One of the parts of the compromise was the Fugitive Slave Act of 1850. This act was an attempt to calm Southerners who were suffering financial losses because many of their slaves were escaping to the north with the help of the people who lived there. Here are some of the provisions of the Fugitive Slave Act. 1. Runaway slaves were to be returned to the state or territory from where they had escaped. 2. All citizens were to aid, that means help, in carrying out the law. For example, citizens had to assist or help in the capture of slaves. Number 3, anyone who in any way aided, that means helped, a slave to escape would be fined $1,000 and imprisoned for 6 months for each slave he helped escape. Of course, that meant that anyone who was part of the Underground Railroad would be severely punished. Attempts to enforce the law were strongly resisted by those who hated slavery. They especially disliked slave hunters, who collected rewards for capturing slaves, and officers of the law whose responsibility it was to apprehend slaves. Many runaway slaves were themselves prepared to fight to the death rather than return to the South. Now here's what we need to do. Suppose you are an ordinary citizen who was called upon to help capture a runaway slave under provisions of the Fugitive Slave Act. Circle the sentence that tells you what you are expected to do. So what sentence tells us what a regular citizen was expected to do? Look back and find it and circle that sentence, please.
Oh, I don't have a pencil.
We have to look back in the text and find where it answered that. What was expected? Just wait. Let's wait for and make sure everybody has to try and answer. Sometimes people just wait for others to answer. We're not going to do that. Yes, sir? Can you what?
Go to the bathroom.
Did you circle the sentence yet?
I don't know.
No.
Here.
All right. What sentence told what a regular citizen was expected to do. Mr. Maley.
Number 2 is the rule. All citizens were to aid in carrying out the law. For example, citizens had to assist in the capture of slaves.
You are correct, it's number 2. Number 2. All citizens were to aid in carrying out the law. For example, citizens had to assist in the capture of slaves. Now you can imagine how that made folks in the North who are absolutely against slavery feel. It even says at the very end that many runaways themselves were prepared to fight to the death rather than return to slavery. They would rather die than go back to slavery. So let's look at what number 2 says. All right, underline.
Oh.
Number 2. Suppose you were a member of the Underground Railroad. As such, you helped 9 slaves to escape. What would be your punishment if caught? Gotta do some math on this one.
No.
Number 3 will help you to figure this out. If you figure it out right away, I want to take a couple minutes. I want to see everybody working to figure this out. Everybody's going to work to figure this out. So, for number 2, you've got to look at number 3 in the reading, which tells you what the punishment is for each enslaved person that you help to free. So, for each person, you pay the fine. For each person, you do the time in jail. So if you had helped 9 enslaved people escape to freedom, what would your punishment be? Your punishment would not be $1,000, well, fine, because it's 9 people. And it would not be only 6 months in prison, because you got that for every person you helped.
All right.
I'm so confused on number 2.
It's like, you saved 9
I
people.
mean, on number 1.
You just underline number 2. All you do is underline this part. That's all you do. It's not hard. All right. So let's talk about it. Number 2. What would your punishment be for helping 9 enslaved people get to freedom? Mr. Clark.
$9,000 and 54 months in prison.
$9,000. And 54 months?